Welcome to our channel. Today, we drift into the fascinating world of the Mongol Empire and explore the story of feeding the Great Mongol Khan and more. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more historical journeys. We'd love to hear from you, so comment below with the place you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all over the world and sharing their perspectives. Let us know in the comments. It's amazing how history connects us across the globe. Imagine standing on a windswept plain beneath a sky so wide it seems endless, where the horizon fades into a blur of distant mountains and rolling grasslands. The air is sharp, carrying the scent of earth, leather, and horse sweat. You hear the faint rumble long before you ever see it, the distant thunder of hooves. Slowly, like a storm gathering strength, the sound grows louder. A wave of riders appears over the ridge, moving as one, their banners snapping in the cold wind. This is not just an army. This is the beating heart of an empire in motion, the Mongol Empire, a power so vast and relentless that it would reshape continents and leave a legacy still felt centuries later. And at the center of this force sits one figure whose name would echo across history, the Great Mongol Khan. To understand the rise of this empire, many people look first to the battlefield, to the arrows, the tactics, and the incredible speed of Mongol cavalry. But there is another story, hiding beneath the surface, quieter yet just as powerful, the story of how the Khan and his people fed themselves, sustained their armies, and turned basic survival into a tool of power. Life on the Mongolian steppe was never gentle. It demanded toughness, adaptation, and constant awareness. Winters were long and merciless, with icy winds sweeping across open land where there were few trees for shelter. Summers could be scorching, the sun beating down on hardened grass. There were no great stone cities, no towering cathedrals, no lush farmland in endless rows. Instead, there were nomad camps, clusters of circular felt tents designed to be taken down quickly, loaded onto wagons, and moved whenever the land demanded it. To survive here, families relied on their animals, horses, sheep, goats, camels, and cattle. These creatures were not just possessions, they were life itself. They provided milk, meat, wool, transportation, and trade. Every child grew up learning to ride almost before they could walk, and every adult understood the rhythms of migration and survival. From this harsh world emerged leaders who knew that strength came not from luxury, but from discipline and resourcefulness. Before there was a vast empire, there were rival tribes constantly clashing, forming alliances one moment and breaking them the next. Among them rose a man who would become Genghiskhan, born as Temujin, whose life began in hardship, betrayal, and exile. He knew hunger not as an idea, but as a companion. He experienced what it meant to be abandoned, to scrape for food, to eat roots and whatever could be found just to stay alive. Those early years shaped his understanding of power. He knew that loyalty was fragile when stomachs were empty. He knew that an army that cannot eat cannot fight. And he understood that leadership was not only about commanding men in battle, but about ensuring they and their families were able to live. As he united the tribes of the Mongol steppe through a mix of strategy, charisma, and ruthless determination, he built something far stronger than a loose confederation. He built a system. Under his rule, and later the rule of his descendants, the Mongols learned to think not just as warriors, but as organizers. They perfected the art of moving entire communities across vast distances, herds, tents, weapons, families, and supplies all traveling together. Where other civilizations were bound by cities and farmland, the Mongols were bound by movement. They did not need to protect farms from invaders. They simply followed the seasons, bringing their food sources with them. But when the empire exploded outward into China, Persia, Eastern Europe, and beyond, the challenge grew much larger. Suddenly, they were ruling people who lived differently, farmed differently, and ate differently. Keeping control meant more than conquering territory. It meant learning how to feed millions. Picture the Khan's grand encampment, a traveling capital, yet surprisingly organized. Tents were laid out carefully, according to rank and purpose. Guards watched the perimeter, while inside the camp, cooks built fires, boiled water, butchered animals, and prepared meals not only for the Khan's household, but for visiting leaders and foreign envoys. Servants carried bowls of steaming broth and trays stacked with roasted meat. Animals grazed nearby under watchful eyes. Every piece of this scene represents planning. Even what looks simple, a pot of soup simmering over a fire, is the result of supply lines stretching across miles of steppe and trade routes connecting distant lands. The Mongols developed a reliable system for distributing resources because chaos meant weakness, and weakness meant rebellion. Through tribute, trade, and taxation, food and goods flowed toward the heart of power. Farmers under Mongol rule contributed grain and livestock. Merchants traveling along the Silk Road transported spices, dried fruits, and luxury foods. Meanwhile, nomadic herders continued to raise animals that could survive the harsh climates of Central Asia. All of this ensured that when the Khan hosted a feast or supplied an army, he was sending a message: the empire provides. The empire takes care of its own and punishes those who disrupt the flow. Imagine ambassadors arriving from far-off kingdoms. They enter the Khan's tent expecting nothing more than rough hospitality, perhaps a modest meal from people they assume are unsophisticated. Instead, they are greeted with abundance. They see roasted lambs laid out whole, bowls of thinned yogurt drinks, trays of cheese curds, breads, exotic fruits from warmer lands, and even rice dishes from conquered territories. They realize, perhaps for the first time, that this empire is not simply a force of destruction. It is a system that has learned to absorb cultures, adapt, and thrive. The Khan himself did not live in marble palaces like other rulers. His surroundings were mobile, practical, and centered on the needs of the nomadic lifestyle. Yet in that simplicity there was immense authority. To dine with the Khan was to enter a world governed by strict etiquette. Refusing a cup of fermented mare's milk could be seen as disrespect. Speaking at the wrong time could cost you the trust or patience of your host. Every meal was layered with meaning. It was a ritual reminding everyone present that all roads, all supplies, and all decisions led back to one central figure. But the story of feeding the Khan was never just about the leader alone. Consider the thousands of soldiers scattered on distant campaigns. They had to be supplied across deserts, mountains, and forests, often in enemy territory. Unlike slower armies dependent on heavy supply wagons, Mongol forces moved fast and lived lightly. They carried dried meat, cheese, and leather bags filled with fermented milk. They could survive on limited rations for long stretches, and their horses were hardy enough to graze almost anywhere. In emergencies, they could even open a vein from a horse, drinking a mixture of blood and milk to stay alive without killing the animal. This combination of endurance and resourcefulness allowed them to travel farther and strike harder than almost any other army of their time. Behind every campaign, though, there were planners calculating how much food was needed, where the next grazing lands lay, and how long the army could sustain itself before resupply. Messengers rode across the empire using a network of relay stations, the yam, where fresh horses and provisions awaited them. These stations functioned like early highways, connecting regions and making administration possible. Food, again, was central. Each station required careful stocking so that riders never had to slow down. Without that chain of nourishment, communication would collapse, and with it, the empire's control. Feeding the Great Mongol Khan, then, was not about one meal or one palace kitchen. It was an empire-wide challenge interwoven with politics, economics, warfare, and culture. Every strategy the Mongols used, whether offering food as hospitality, demanding it as tribute, or using it to support armies, reinforced authority. Leaders understood that when people felt secure in their ability to eat, they were more likely to remain loyal. Conversely, food shortages could cause unrest. The Khan's image depended on his perceived ability to provide. In many ways, food became a symbol of legitimacy. At the same time, the empire fostered exchange between different regions. Foods that once belonged to isolated cultures began to spread. Chinese techniques for preparing noodles, Persian styles of cooking rice, and Central Asian traditions of steaming dumplings slowly made their way across territories. The Mongol Empire unintentionally became a bridge for culinary ideas, allowing recipes and ingredients to travel with merchants, soldiers, and settlers. What people ate began to reflect a world that was suddenly more connected than ever before. Yet even as the empire grew, the heart of Mongol identity remained tied to the open steppe and its rugged simplicity. The Khan, no matter how powerful, remained a man of the grasslands. He valued resilience, adaptability, and communal strength. Meals shared inside the jur were not merely occasions to satisfy hunger. They were moments when relationships were strengthened and decisions were made. Around those low wooden tables, leaders discussed strategy, alliances, and the next direction the empire would move. When we step back and look at the big picture, we begin to see that history is not shaped only by battles and treaties. It is shaped by ordinary activities like eating that decide who survives, who thrives, and who falls. For the Mongols, the ability to feed their Khan, their armies, and their people was a foundation of success. It allowed them to remain constantly in motion, to manage a massive territory, and to inspire both fear and respect from those they conquered. And so, when we talk about the Great Mongol Khan, we are not just talking about a military genius or a political architect. We are talking about a leader who understood the most basic truth of all: power must be nourished. The empire did not run only on iron and arrows. It ran on broth, simmering in cauldrons, milk fermenting in leather bags, animals grazing across plains, and networks that ensured no important camp went without supplies. As night falls over the steppe, the fires of the encampment glow softly, casting flickering shadows on the tents. Riders return from patrol. Children curl up beside their families. Somewhere near the center, a meal is finished, bowls are set aside, and strategists lean in, speaking quietly about the future. Beyond the edges of the camp, darkness spreads, but within the circle of firelight, life continues, fueled by the simple act of sharing food. This world, balanced between survival and ambition, is where the story of feeding the Great Mongol Khan truly begins, not as a tale of feasts alone, but as the story of an entire civilization built on the art of sustaining itself. We often think of the Mongols as a people defined by their ferocity on the battlefield, a culture of warriors who swept across continents with unmatched speed and precision. Yet this image, while true in part, tells only one side of the story. Beneath the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel lies a world built on preparation, endurance, and an intimate understanding of the land and its resources. Every rider, every scout, every general relied not solely on skill in battle, but on an intricate system that ensured survival in a harsh, unforgiving environment. It is here, in the daily life of the Mongol horseman, that we begin to uncover the importance of diet, sustenance, and mobility in maintaining one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen. The steppe demanded resilience. The open grasslands offered freedom, but they also offered no safety net. There were no granaries of wheat stretching for miles, no markets bustling with merchants ready to supply armies. Survival required foresight, innovation, and an extraordinary capacity for adaptation. Young boys learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk, and the strength of a warrior was measured as much by his endurance and ability to survive on the move as by his skill with bow and arrow. Every horse, every piece of equipment, every morsel of food mattered, because on the steppe, scarcity could be fatal. The mobility of the Mongols was their greatest advantage, and yet it was also a constant challenge. Horses carried riders across vast distances, but even the hardiest animal could not survive without proper care, food, and rest. The Mongol diet, therefore, was intimately connected to the animals they relied upon. Their primary source of sustenance was often the horse itself, but not in the way one might imagine. While horses provided occasional meat in times of extreme need, they more importantly provided milk. Mare's milk, when fermented, became a drink called arag, a tangy, slightly alcoholic beverage that served multiple purposes. It was a source of calories, hydration, and vitamins, and it could sustain a warrior when no other food was available. Arag was more than nourishment. It was a medicine, a morale booster, and a symbol of the steppe itself. To drink, it was to connect to the land, to the animals, and to the rhythms of life that had allowed the Mongols to endure in an environment that would have defeated less resourceful people. The Mongols were masters of making the most of what they had. They wasted nothing. Meat was boiled in great iron cauldrons, simmered into broths that could feed entire groups of riders. Bones, fat, and organs were used to extract every possible nutrient. Cheese was made from milk, dried and preserved for travel. Curd and yogurt became staple foods that could be carried over long distances. Every ingredient served a purpose, and every method of preparation was designed with endurance in mind. The result was a diet that was simple, functional, and deeply tied to the landscape. In the freezing winters of the steppe, fat was essential for survival, providing energy to withstand the bitter cold. In the dry summers, dried meat and cheese could sustain a rider without slowing him down. Every meal, therefore, was a matter of strategy, not just sustenance. Consider the life of a Mongol scout on the frontier of the empire. He might ride for days without encountering a friendly settlement, traveling across mountains, rivers, and deserts. His horse grazes along the way, providing energy for both animal and rider. He carries with him dried meat, cheese, and arag. Perhaps he carries a small flask of blood drawn from a horse, a technique used in emergencies to sustain himself without harming the animal. Every step is calculated. Where will the next grazing land be? Where can he find water? How much energy does he have left for the next leg of the journey? This is not the life of a soldier who waits for supplies in a fortress. It is a life of constant calculation, where the ability to survive depends on knowledge, skill, and careful planning. Every meal is critical. Every resource is precious. The Mongols' understanding of logistics extended far beyond individual survival. They were able to move entire armies across continents, and to do so required an unparalleled knowledge of supply chains, food storage, and resource management. Before a campaign, leaders would calculate how many animals were needed, how much food each soldier required, and how far the army could travel before needing resupply. Herds were moved alongside soldiers to provide meat and milk. Caravans of supplies followed carefully planned routes. Relay stations, known as the yam, provided fresh horses and food to messengers and armies on the move. These stations were stocked with grain, dried meat, and other essentials, creating a network that allowed rapid movement and communication across vast distances. In this way, the Mongols combined speed with endurance, ensuring that their forces were not only fast but also sustainable. The diet of the Mongol warriors was closely tied to the rhythms of the steppe. Seasons dictated movement, and movement dictated sustenance. In spring and summer, animals grazed on the fresh grasses of the plains, providing abundant milk for both humans and horses. In autumn, the focus shifted to preserving food for winter. Meat was dried, milk was turned into cheese and yogurt, and herds were carefully managed to ensure survival through the cold months. Winter campaigns were rare, not because of fear of battle, but because survival itself became more difficult. Yet even then, the Mongols found ways to endure, drawing on preserved foods and the resources they carried with them. The relationship between the people, their animals, and the land was a delicate balance, one that required intimate knowledge and careful stewardship. The preparation of food was not a task left to chance. Cooks and attendants played a crucial role in every campaign. They had to ensure that food was distributed fairly, that it reached those who needed it most, and that nothing was wasted. The Khan himself would have trusted these individuals to manage the flow of sustenance, knowing that the success of a military operation could hinge on whether soldiers were fed and healthy. Meals were carefully planned, with attention to nutrition, morale, and logistics. Even a single failure in this system could have dire consequences. A hungry soldier is a weak soldier. A poorly fed army is a defeated army. The Mongols understood this intuitively, turning the simple act of feeding into an art form, a science, and a tool of power. Mare's milk and dried meat were the staples of the Mongol diet, but they were far from the only foods consumed. The Mongols were opportunistic eaters, incorporating what they found along their routes. They hunted game when available, fished in rivers and lakes, and gathered edible plants. They traded with neighboring civilizations, exchanging hides and horses for grains, vegetables, and other foods that were not easily produced on the steppe. Over time, the Mongol diet became more diverse, reflecting the vast reach of the empire and the interactions with different cultures. This adaptability was a key factor in the empire's ability to sustain itself over time and distance. The diet also shaped the culture and identity of the Mongols. Sharing meals was a ritual that reinforced social bonds. Eating together in a tent or around a fire was a communal act, one that strengthened trust and loyalty. The preparation and distribution of food reflected hierarchy and respect. Guests were honored with the best portions, soldiers were rewarded for loyalty with extra rations, and the Khan himself set the tone for these interactions. Food was not merely sustenance, it was a medium of social cohesion, a tangible expression of order and authority. For the ordinary Mongol soldier, the diet was both simple and functional. It provided the energy needed to ride for hours, to endure harsh weather, and to fight effectively. Yet, even this simplicity carried lessons. It taught endurance, resourcefulness, and respect for what the land could provide. Every meal, every ration, was a reminder that survival depended on preparation and skill, that strength was measured not only by martial prowess, but by the ability to endure the challenges of the steppe. These lessons were passed from one generation to the next, creating a culture deeply attuned to the rhythms of life and the importance of sustenance. At the same time, the diet enabled the Mongols to achieve feats that would have been impossible for other armies. Their mobility allowed them to strike rapidly, outmaneuver opponents, and conquer vast territories. Their ability to live off the land, supplemented by preserved foods and strategic supply networks, meant they could sustain campaigns over months or even years. The combination of speed, endurance, and careful planning created a military force that was virtually unstoppable. Food, in this context, was not just a necessity, it was a weapon, a strategic advantage that allowed the Mongols to dominate the battlefield. As we examine the Mongol diet in greater detail, we also see its impact on trade and cultural exchange. The foods they carried, the animals they raised, and the techniques they used traveled along with them. Spices, grains, and other goods moved along trade routes that were secured by Mongol armies. Recipes and culinary traditions spread across regions, blending into new forms and creating connections between distant cultures. In this way, the Mongols not only shaped military and political history, but also left a lasting imprint on the culinary landscape of Eurasia. The act of feeding themselves and their warriors became a conduit for broader cultural exchange, one that would continue long after the empire itself had fragmented. Ultimately, the story of the Mongol diet is the story of adaptation, ingenuity, and survival. It is the story of how a people living on one of the harshest landscapes on Earth learned to endure, thrive, and expand their influence. Every meal, every ration, every fermented drink of mare's milk was part of a larger strategy that ensured the survival of the army, the loyalty of the people, and the authority of the Khan. It reminds us that history is not only shaped by battles and politics, but also by the most fundamental needs of human life. The Mongols understood that power is built not only through conquest, but through the careful management of resources, and that the simple act of feeding oneself and one's people can become a foundation for an empire. The mobility of the Mongol warriors, their reliance on the horse, and their ingenious methods of food preservation created a culture that was uniquely suited to both survival and conquest. Their diet was more than a collection of ingredients. It was a system, a strategy, and a reflection of their understanding of the world around them. By looking at what they ate and how they sustained themselves, we gain insight into the extraordinary resilience of a civilization that could conquer vast territories and leave an enduring legacy. Food in the Mongol world was never just food. It was life, power, and the key to unlocking the potential of an empire that stretched across continents. Life on the Mongolian steppe demanded a level of resilience and adaptability that is hard to imagine for those accustomed to more temperate or urban environments. The Mongol people lived in a world that was often unforgiving, where the line between survival and disaster could be measured in days or even hours. Every decision mattered, from when to move the herds, to which valleys offered water, to how to prepare the next meal. Their diet, which may appear simple to the modern eye, was in fact a sophisticated survival system, finely tuned to the harsh rhythms of the land and the needs of a highly mobile population. For the Mongols, food was never just nourishment, it was a matter of strategy, endurance, and survival. It shaped their campaigns, their daily lives, and the very structure of their society. At the heart of this system was the horse, the lifeblood of Mongol mobility. Horses were more than tools of war, they were partners in survival. Every horse had a role, and every rider depended upon its strength, stamina, and ability to forage across the vast steppe. A Mongol warrior's diet was inseparable from the care of his horse. The animal grazed freely on grass, while the rider drew strength from the milk, blood, and meat it could provide. In emergencies, blood was drawn from the animal, mixed with milk, and consumed by the rider, a practice that allowed both to survive without sacrificing the horse entirely. This method, while striking to modern sensibilities, reflected the pragmatic ingenuity of a people whose existence depended on careful stewardship of their resources. It was an intimate relationship, one of mutual reliance, in which survival depended on balance, respect, and knowledge. Meat was the cornerstone of the Mongol diet, but it was far from a simple matter of hunting and consuming. The preparation of meat was a process designed to maximize nutrition and preserve sustenance for long journeys. Animals were butchered with precision, with bones, fat, and organs turned into broths, soups, and other concentrated forms of nourishment. Fat, in particular, was crucial in the freezing winters of the steppe. It provided the energy needed to withstand bitter cold, long rides, and physically demanding work. Curd and yogurt made from mare, cow, or goat milk were dried and carried as preserved food, capable of sustaining a warrior for weeks. Every element of the diet was calculated to provide maximum energy, endurance, and efficiency. Nothing was wasted, nothing was left to chance. The Mongols understood that a hungry warrior was a weak warrior, and their entire culture reflected this understanding. In the daily life of a Mongol soldier, these practices were not extraordinary, they were routine. Imagine a rider on patrol at dawn. He rises as the cold wind sweeps across the plain, preparing himself and his horse for the day ahead. A small breakfast of dried meat, cheese, and arag provides the fuel for hours of riding. The horse grazes while the rider scouts for signs of enemy movement, water, or grazing land. Each step of the journey is a balance of endurance and resource management. The soldier calculates how far he can travel before the horse tires, how much energy he can expend before the next meal, and how to preserve the rations he carries. The Mongols were, in effect, constantly practicing logistics on a personal scale, learning through necessity how to manage resources, sustain life, and remain effective in a harsh environment. But the Mongols' approach to survival extended beyond the individual. Large-scale campaigns required careful coordination of supplies, animals, and personnel. Armies were composed of thousands of riders, each with their own horses, rations, and equipment. Herds of animals followed the army, providing milk, meat, and hides. Supply caravans carried essential goods, and relay stations along the way ensured that messengers and armies could move efficiently across vast distances. This system was not accidental. It was meticulously planned, often months in advance. Leaders calculated how much food would be needed, where grazing lands were available, and how far troops could travel before resupply. Every campaign was a test of organization as much as of combat skill. The Mongols' ingenuity in survival extended to the ways in which they preserved and carried food. Meat was often dried or smoked, creating a portable and long-lasting source of protein. Dairy products were fermented, boiled, or dried to extend their shelf life. Even blood was carefully managed as a resource, consumed when necessary but never wasted. This approach allowed the Mongols to remain mobile for weeks or months at a time, striking suddenly and retreating before their enemies could respond. The combination of preservation techniques, animal husbandry, and strategic planning made the Mongols uniquely capable of sustained campaigns over great distances. Meals themselves carried symbolic and practical significance. Sharing food was a social ritual, reinforcing bonds between soldiers, clans, and leaders. A communal meal could strengthen trust, resolve disputes, and instill loyalty. At the same time, the distribution of food reflected hierarchy and authority. Senior officers and the Khan himself received the best portions, while soldiers were allocated rations designed to maximize energy and endurance. This system reinforced discipline and structure, ensuring that each individual understood both their responsibilities and their place within the larger framework of the army. Consider the role of women in the preparation of food. Mongol women were not only caregivers and homemakers, they were essential to the survival of the army and the camp. They managed the kitchens, prepared meals for warriors, and ensured that rations were distributed efficiently. They also played a critical role in preserving food, using traditional methods to dry meat, ferment dairy, and store grains. Their knowledge and labor were integral to the functioning of the empire, providing stability and sustenance in a world where hunger could quickly become catastrophic. The division of labor, far from being arbitrary, was a carefully balanced system in which every contribution was necessary for survival. Horses were not only a source of mobility, but also a key element in the Mongols' diet. The relationship between rider and horse was symbiotic. Horses provided milk, meat, and energy for the riders, while riders ensured the animals were cared for and sustained. Herds followed armies, grazing on open plains and providing a continuous source of nourishment. The Mongols' ability to manage and utilize these animals was unparalleled, allowing them to sustain large armies in regions where conventional supply lines would have failed. The integration of animal husbandry, diet, and mobility created a system that was both efficient and highly effective, enabling the Mongols to dominate territories far beyond the steppe. The Mongols were also opportunistic, incorporating new foods into their diet as they encountered different cultures. During campaigns, they encountered cultivated grains, fruits, and vegetables, which were sometimes traded or taken as tribute. These foods were integrated into the diet when available, adding variety and nutrition. The ability to adapt to new food sources was a hallmark of Mongol ingenuity, demonstrating a pragmatism that extended beyond warfare. They understood that survival depended on flexibility, and they were willing to incorporate whatever resources were necessary to maintain their strength and endurance. The Mongols' understanding of food and survival extended to the design of their military campaigns. They chose routes based not only on strategic considerations, but also on the availability of grazing land and water. They timed movements to align with seasonal changes in vegetation, ensuring that both humans and animals could find sustenance along the way. This attention to environmental conditions was crucial for maintaining mobility and effectiveness. Unlike sedentary armies, the Mongols were constantly aware of their surroundings, adjusting plans to accommodate the realities of the land. Their diet, mobility, and strategic planning were interconnected, forming a cohesive system that allowed them to conquer vast territories. Even in the harshest conditions, the Mongols demonstrated extraordinary endurance. Soldiers could ride for days with minimal rest, sustained by dried meat, cheese, and arag. They could survive extreme cold, heat, and scarcity, relying on knowledge, preparation, and resourcefulness. The ability to endure hardship became a defining characteristic of Mongol culture, shaping not only military strategy, but also social norms and values. Resilience, discipline, and adaptability were celebrated and reinforced through everyday practices, including the management and consumption of food. The Mongol diet also facilitated communication and coordination across the empire. Supply networks, relay stations, and herds allowed armies to remain mobile while maintaining access to essential resources. Messengers could travel vast distances, carrying orders and information without delay, because the infrastructure supporting them ensured that food and animals were always available. This integration of sustenance, mobility, and communication was revolutionary for the time, enabling the Mongols to maintain control over territories that spanned thousands of miles. Food was not merely a survival tool, it was a strategic asset that underpinned the very power of the empire. The relationship between the Mongols and their environment was complex and deeply reciprocal. The steppe provided grass for animals, game for hunting, and resources for daily life. In return, the Mongols managed herds, preserved food, and adapted their movements to the land's rhythms. This balance was delicate, requiring constant attention and adjustment. Failure to maintain it could lead to starvation, weakened armies, or loss of control. The Mongols' success depended on their ability to read the land, anticipate challenges, and act decisively. Their diet, mobility, and resource management were inseparable from this broader ecological and strategic awareness. Food was also a means of projecting power and authority. The ability to sustain armies, provide for followers, and distribute resources effectively reinforced loyalty and obedience. The Khan's capacity to feed his people was a demonstration of his control over both the natural and human resources of the empire. It was a tangible expression of leadership, visible in every meal shared, every ration distributed, and every herd managed. In this way, sustenance became intertwined with governance, diplomacy, and military strategy. The Mongols understood that feeding their people was not only a practical necessity, but also a demonstration of political and social authority. In examining the Mongol approach to diet and survival, we see a culture defined by practicality, resourcefulness, and resilience. Their methods were not ostentatious or extravagant. They were functional, efficient, and adapted to the demands of the steppe. The combination of animal husbandry, preservation techniques, mobility, and strategic planning allowed the Mongols to achieve feats of endurance and conquest that were unparalleled in their time. Every meal, every ration, and every interaction with the land and animals contributed to the strength of the empire. The Mongols' ability to survive and thrive in one of the harshest environments on earth is a testament to their ingenuity, discipline, and intimate knowledge of the world around them. Ultimately, the Mongol diet was a reflection of their society as a whole. It emphasized endurance, adaptability, and strategic thinking. It reinforced social hierarchies, fostered loyalty, and supported military campaigns. It was a system in which every element had a purpose, and every individual played a role. From the horseman on patrol to the Khan at the center of power, the act of feeding oneself and others was inseparable from the larger goals of survival, conquest, and governance. Through this lens, we see that the Mongols' mastery of mobility and sustenance was not incidental, it was deliberate, sophisticated, and integral to the empire's extraordinary achievements. The Mongols' approach to food and survival teaches us a profound lesson. The smallest, most basic acts, eating, drinking, preserving, distributing, can be the foundation of extraordinary power. By understanding the intricate connections between diet, mobility, and endurance, we gain insight into how a people from a seemingly remote and harsh landscape were able to build one of the largest contiguous empires in history. Their success was rooted not only in their skill with weapons, but in their ability to sustain life in the most challenging conditions, turning necessity into strategy and survival into empire. When we imagine the Great Mongol Khan, it is easy to picture him surrounded by warriors and advisors, issuing commands across the steppe, his eyes fixed on the horizon, calculating the next conquest. Yet the reality of power for the Khan extended far beyond battlefields and strategy councils. It was also expressed through something far more human, far more tangible: food. In the courts and encampments of the Mongol Empire, the preparation, presentation, and consumption of meals were central to demonstrating authority, cementing alliances, and displaying wealth. Feeding the Khan was not merely an act of sustenance. It was an elaborate symbolic performance, a demonstration that the ruler could provide, protect, and command loyalty across vast distances. The meals served to the Khan were carefully curated, reflecting both the practical needs of his body and the political needs of his empire. Every dish, every ingredient, every spice carried meaning. sending a message not just to those seated around the table, but to the broader world watching the Mongol Empire rise. The Khan's diet was rich, diverse, and carefully balanced to sustain him during the constant demands of leadership. Unlike the ordinary Mongol soldier, whose meals emphasized endurance and practicality, the Khan's meals were both functional and ceremonial. They drew from the resources of the steppe, the bounty of conquered lands, and the exotic goods transported along trade routes that connected the far reaches of Eurasia. Roasted lamb, cooked over open flames or in iron cauldrons, was a centerpiece, seasoned with salt, fat, and sometimes herbs transported from distant regions. Dishes of rice, fruits, and vegetables from Persia and China added variety and nutrition. Dairy products remained central, with thick cheeses, fermented milk, and curds providing energy and sustenance. Bread from conquered settlements, sometimes enriched with honey or spices, complemented these dishes. The variety of foods reflected the Khan's power to draw resources from across the empire, demonstrating that under his rule, the wealth of the world flowed to his table. Mealtime in the Khan's court was a carefully orchestrated affair. Tents or halls were arranged to reflect hierarchy and rank, with the Khan seated at the center, surrounded by trusted advisors, generals, and visiting dignitaries. Servants moved with precision, carrying bowls of steaming broth, trays of roasted meat, and platters of fruits and bread. The arrangement of dishes, the order in which they were served, and even the selection of ingredients were deliberate choices, designed to signal status, respect, and political alignment. Guests could interpret the placement of a dish or the allocation of a portion as an indicator of favor or disfavor. In this way, every meal became a negotiation of power, conducted not only with words, but through the tangible medium of food. Ambassadors and envoys from distant lands were often astounded by the scale and abundance of the Khan's feasts. They arrived expecting austere hospitality from a nomadic people, only to find tables laden with roasted animals, preserved fruits, exotic spices, and delicacies from lands they had never visited. These feasts were more than nourishment. They were displays of wealth, power, and control. The Khan's ability to provide such abundance, even while traveling across the steppe, sent a clear message. The Mongol Empire had the resources to sustain its leaders, its armies, and its subjects, and it could extend these resources as both reward and coercion. To dine with the Khan was to witness the empire itself in microcosm, a carefully managed system of logistics, supply, and authority. Feasting also served as a tool of diplomacy. The Khan understood that alliances were fragile and that loyalty required more than fear of military might. By providing food, he created bonds of obligation and trust. Guests were honored with the best portions, ensuring that their loyalty or cooperation was reinforced through tangible generosity. Conversely, the careful withholding or delayed presentation of food could communicate disapproval or assert dominance. In this way, the act of eating became inseparable from the act of governing. Every meal was both sustenance and statement, a combination of practicality and political strategy that reinforced the Khan's authority over a sprawling, diverse empire. The preparation of these meals was itself a sophisticated operation. Cooks and attendants worked tirelessly to manage the complex logistics required to feed the Khan and his court. Ingredients had to be sourced from local herds, farms, and trade networks, preserved for transport, and prepared with skill. The methods of cooking varied, including roasting, boiling, fermenting, and drying, all designed to maximize flavor, nutrition, and longevity. The presentation of food was equally important, reflecting the Khan's taste, status, and understanding of cultural symbolism. Certain dishes might be reserved for special occasions, while others were regular fare, carefully selected to maintain health and strength. In this way, the kitchen became a center of both domestic and political power, with every meal reinforcing the Khan's rule. The diversity of the Khan's diet also reflected the vast reach of the Mongol Empire. As the empire expanded into China, Persia, and Eastern Europe, new foods, spices, and culinary techniques were incorporated into the court's meals. Noodles from China, rice dishes from Persia, dried fruits and nuts from Central Asia, each addition represented a conquest, a trade relationship, or a cultural exchange. By integrating these foods into his table, the Khan not only nourished himself, but also demonstrated the breadth and richness of his dominion. The meals themselves became a microcosm of the empire, a tangible reflection of its diversity, wealth, and control. Feasting also had a social dimension that reinforced hierarchy and loyalty. The Khan's table was arranged according to rank, with senior generals, trusted advisors, and honored guests seated closer to him. The sharing of food, the order of service, and the allocation of portions all communicated the social order. To dine at the Khan's table was to participate in a ritual of authority, where the act of eating reinforced relationships, obligations, and status. Soldiers in attendance observed these rituals as well, understanding that their own behavior, discipline, and respect were integral to maintaining favor and order. Every meal, therefore, was both a practical necessity and a carefully managed social performance. Beyond the ceremonial and political aspects, the Khan's diet was designed to maintain physical and mental endurance. Leadership demanded long hours, intense decision-making, and constant travel. Meals needed to provide energy, sustain concentration, and support resilience in the face of both physical and psychological demands. Proteins from meat, fats for energy, carbohydrates from grains and bread, and vitamins from fruits and vegetables were all carefully balanced. Fermented dairy provided probiotics and hydration, while spices and herbs contributed flavor and medicinal benefits. The Khan's survival, effectiveness, and authority were intimately tied to the food he consumed, making the kitchen as vital to the empire as the armory or the battlefield. The Khan's feasts also served to impress and intimidate. Foreign emissaries, visiting dignitaries, and potential allies were often overwhelmed by the scale, abundance, and organization of these meals. They observed not only the food, but also the efficiency and precision with which it was prepared and served. The message was clear: this ruler commands resources, manpower, and organization on a scale that rivals the greatest civilizations of the world. To dine with the Khan was to experience, in a tangible way, the power of the Mongol Empire. Food, in this context, was a symbol of authority, a demonstration of capability, and a reinforcement of political control. The act of feeding the Khan was also inseparable from the logistics that supported the empire. Supplies had to be transported over long distances, herds managed to provide milk and meat, and trade networks maintained to bring in exotic ingredients. Cooks, attendants, and messengers all played essential roles in this system. The ability to organize and manage these resources was a testament to the empire's sophistication. It was not enough to conquer territory. The Khan had to ensure that his court, armies, and subjects were provisioned, sustained, and loyal. Food was the medium through which this system functioned, linking military, political, and economic power into a cohesive whole. Even the rituals surrounding meals had deep significance. Certain foods were associated with celebration, victory, or religious observance. Ceremonial toasts, the offering of special dishes, and the presentation of rare ingredients all conveyed meaning beyond the act of eating. The Khan's guests, whether foreign or domestic, interpreted these signals, understanding that each choice in the preparation and serving of food reflected status, favor, or political intent. In this way, the meals of the Mongol court were a form of communication, a language spoken through ingredients, preparation, and presentation. The Khan's diet, while abundant and diverse, remained grounded in practicality. Foods were selected for nutrition, energy, and preservation. Roasted meats, fermented dairy, dried grains, and preserved fruits ensured that the Khan could travel with his court, campaign with his armies, and endure the rigors of leadership. Even as the meals became elaborate displays of wealth and power, they retained a focus on functionality. Every dish served a purpose, reinforcing the broader system of survival, governance, and authority that defined the Mongol Empire. The ability to feed the Khan effectively also reinforced social hierarchies and loyalty within the empire. Soldiers, attendants, and advisors all understood the centrality of sustenance to survival and power. By controlling food, the Khan could reward loyalty, ensure obedience, and manage relationships across vast distances. The preparation, distribution, and consumption of meals became a tool of governance, one that complemented military strength, diplomacy, and strategic planning. Food was both practical and political, serving as a bridge between survival and power, between domestic management and imperial ambition. Through this lens, we can understand the Khan not only as a conqueror, but as a master of logistics, culture, and symbolism. The meals he consumed were reflections of his authority, the reach of his empire, and the effectiveness of his administration. They were microcosms of power, carefully curated, meticulously prepared, and strategically distributed. The ability to feed the Khan, sustain his court, and impress both allies and rivals alike was a testament to the sophistication of Mongol governance and the centrality of sustenance in the exercise of power. Feasting with the Khan was therefore an experience that extended far beyond hunger. It was an act of diplomacy, a demonstration of authority, and a celebration of the empire's reach and resources. Every bite carried meaning, every dish reflected the empire's wealth, and every meal reinforced social and political hierarchies. Through the careful orchestration of food, the Khan projected power, maintained loyalty, and cultivated an image that was both awe-inspiring and strategically effective. The meals of the Mongol court were as much instruments of empire as the cavalry, arrows, and strategies that conquered lands across Eurasia. By understanding the Khan's diet, we gain insight into the broader functioning of the Mongol Empire. The combination of abundance, logistics, and symbolism allowed the Khan to maintain control over vast territories, project power across distant lands, and manage complex networks of people and resources. Feeding the Khan was not a simple act of sustenance. It was an essential component of empire building, a tangible expression of authority, and a reflection of the sophisticated systems that underpinned one of the largest contiguous empires in history. In the Khan's court, food was power, survival, diplomacy, and spectacle all rolled into one, sustaining both the ruler and the empire he commanded. Behind every grand meal, every impressive feast, and every thriving encampment of the Mongol Empire, there existed a vast, intricate, and largely invisible system of organization and logistics that allowed the empire to function at its unprecedented scale. While the outward appearance of Mongol life might seem simple, riders on horseback, herds grazing across open plains, tents arranged in orderly clusters, these visible elements were supported by a hidden machine of extraordinary complexity, a network designed to move people, goods, and resources across thousands of miles with precision and efficiency. Feeding the Great Khan, sustaining the armies, and maintaining the loyalty of millions required a level of planning that rivaled the sophistication of the greatest civilizations of the time. It was not simply a matter of hunting, farming, or gathering. It was a system that integrated military strategy, administration, commerce, and human ingenuity into a single, functioning organism. The first and most critical element of this system was the careful management of herds. Animals were the foundation of Mongol sustenance. Horses, sheep, goats, cattle, and camels were not merely property or tools of war. They were the lifeblood of the empire. Each animal was carefully monitored, rotated between pastures, and fed according to the season and the needs of the people. Horses provided mobility, milk, and, in emergencies, blood or meat. Sheep and goats offered milk, meat, wool, and hides. Cattle were used for draft purposes and meat. The Mongols understood the delicate balance of animal husbandry. Overgrazing could devastate pastures and threaten survival, while underutilization could mean wasted resources. Herds had to be strategically positioned to ensure that grazing was sustainable, that animals were healthy, and that sufficient food could be drawn for both soldiers and civilians. The success of an army or encampment depended as much on this careful management of livestock as it did on tactics or weaponry. To complement herd management, the Mongols developed supply networks that stretched across their empire like the veins of a living organism. At the heart of these networks were relay stations, known as the yam, strategically placed along the major routes of the steppe. These stations provided fresh horses, provisions, and shelter for messengers, soldiers, and administrators. They were stocked with grain, dried meat, dairy products, and other essentials to ensure that communication and supply lines could function without interruption. The yam network allowed messages to travel hundreds of miles in days, far faster than would have been possible otherwise, and it also ensured that armies could remain mobile without succumbing to hunger or exhaustion. Each station was meticulously maintained, with caretakers responsible for stock levels, animal health, and the readiness of personnel. The efficiency of these stations was critical. A single failure could delay communications, hinder military campaigns, or even lead to the loss of life. Caravans were another critical component of the Mongols' logistical machine. These caravans carried food, tools, luxury goods, and other supplies across the empire, connecting distant regions and facilitating trade, tribute, and military support. Caravan leaders had to plan routes carefully, accounting for water sources, grazing opportunities, and potential threats from bandits or hostile forces. Goods were carefully packed, often in layered arrangements designed to prevent spoilage or damage during long journeys. Drivers and guards coordinated with local administrators and relay stations to ensure that supplies reached their destinations on time. The smooth operation of these caravans was essential not only for feeding the Khan and his court, but also for sustaining the armies and maintaining the empire's economic stability. The Mongols also relied on local communities and tributary systems to supplement their supply networks. Conquered regions were often required to provide food, livestock, and other resources to support Mongol forces. Farmers, herders, and craftsmen contributed to the empire's sustenance through a combination of taxes, tribute, and labor. This system ensured that resources flowed toward the central authorities, enabling the Khan and his administrators to manage vast territories efficiently. At the same time, it required careful oversight to prevent abuse, rebellion, or shortages. Mongol administrators were skilled at balancing extraction with sustainability, ensuring that the local population remained productive and cooperative while still providing for the needs of the empire. Behind this visible flow of goods and animals lay an equally important flow of information. The Mongols maintained detailed records of resources, routes, and personnel, enabling them to anticipate shortages, plan campaigns, and coordinate large-scale movements. The messengers carried not only orders, but also intelligence about local conditions, availability of food, and the status of herds. This constant flow of information allowed the Khan to make informed decisions and adapt quickly to changing circumstances. It also meant that the empire could respond to emergencies, whether they were natural disasters, rebellions, or military threats. Logistics and information were inseparable. One could not function effectively without the other. Food storage and preservation were equally critical to the success of this logistical network. The Mongols employed a variety of techniques to ensure that meat, dairy, and grains could survive long journeys or harsh conditions. Meat was dried, smoked, or boiled into concentrated broths. Dairy products were fermented, turned into cheese, or stored in animal skins. Grains were carefully dried and stored in secure locations. Even blood, in some cases, was collected and preserved for emergencies. These preservation techniques allowed the Mongols to maintain mobility without sacrificing nutrition or energy. Armies could campaign far from settled areas, relying on preserved foods and grazing animals rather than cumbersome supply wagons. The ability to sustain life in motion was a cornerstone of Mongol power. The hidden machinery of logistics extended beyond the army itself. Kitchens, attendants, and administrators played vital roles in managing supplies, preparing meals, and distributing food. Cooks were responsible not only for flavor, but also for nutrition, preservation, and efficiency. They had to balance the needs of different individuals, from the Khan to ordinary soldiers, ensuring that everyone received the sustenance required to perform their duties. Attendants and messengers coordinated deliveries, monitored supplies, and maintained order within the encampments. Their work was essential to the functioning of the empire, often invisible to outsiders but critical to the success of campaigns and the maintenance of authority. The integration of logistics with military strategy was one of the Mongols' greatest achievements. Armies were able to move rapidly across vast distances because they were supported by an intricate network of supplies, relay stations, and preserved foods. Commanders could plan campaigns with confidence, knowing that troops could be fed, animals could be maintained, and messages could be delivered. This ability to sustain mobility gave the Mongols a decisive advantage over more sedentary or conventional armies, which were often slowed by supply issues or local scarcity. Logistics became not merely a support function, but a central element of military power, enabling the Mongols to conquer lands and maintain control over vast territories. The Khan's feasts, often seen as luxurious displays of wealth and authority, were also deeply connected to this logistical network. The abundance on the table was not accidental. It was the result of careful planning, coordination, and execution. Every dish reflected the movement of goods, the management of herds, and the efficiency of supply chains. The ability to feed the Khan and his court consistently was a demonstration of the empire's capacity to organize, control, and sustain itself. In this sense, every meal was both a practical necessity and a statement of power, a tangible expression of the hidden machinery that underpinned the empire's success. Trade networks further strengthened the Mongols' logistical capabilities. Merchants and caravans moved goods across the empire, supplying food, spices, textiles, and luxury items. These networks were protected by the Khan's forces, ensuring safe passage and predictable delivery. By facilitating trade, the Mongols not only enhanced the variety and quality of the Khan's meals, but also reinforced political stability and economic integration. Goods from China, Persia, Central Asia, and Europe could reach the Khan's court, demonstrating the empire's vast reach and the sophistication of its administrative systems. Trade was a conduit for both sustenance and diplomacy, linking logistics with political authority and cultural exchange. The coordination of resources, personnel, and information was not limited to wartime. Even during peacetime, the Mongols maintained a system capable of sustaining the Khan, his court, and the population at large. Seasonal migrations, local production, and tribute systems ensured that food and resources were available when needed. Administrators monitored stock levels, adjusted allocations, and anticipated shortages. Herds were rotated to prevent overgrazing, stored foods were managed to avoid spoilage, and relay stations were maintained to guarantee rapid communication. The empire functioned as a living organism with logistics at its heart, ensuring that every part of the system contributed to survival, stability, and power. The Mongols' approach to logistics reflected a broader understanding of empire building. They recognized that conquest alone was insufficient. Control depended on the ability to sustain populations, maintain armies, and project authority across great distances. Food was a central element in this system, linking the physical needs of people and animals with the political and administrative functions of the state. By mastering logistics, the Mongols transformed the challenges of mobility, distance, and scarcity into advantages, allowing them to govern effectively, respond to crises, and expand their influence. The hidden machinery behind every feast, every campaign, and every encampment was a testament to their ingenuity and strategic vision. Ultimately, the story of the Khan's logistics is the story of an empire that thrived not only through military prowess, but through the mastery of supply, resource management, and information flow. Feeding the Khan was not an isolated act of luxury or convenience. It was the culmination of a complex system that integrated herds, caravans, relay stations, trade networks, and human labor. It was a system that ensured mobility, sustained armies, reinforced loyalty, and projected power. By understanding this hidden machinery, we gain insight into the remarkable organization, foresight, and sophistication that allowed the Mongol Empire to rise, expand, and endure in ways that few other civilizations could match. Every meal, every ration, and every supply route was a thread in a vast network that sustained both the Khan and the empire he ruled, revealing the profound connection between logistics, sustenance, and power in one of history's greatest empires. The story of the Mongol Empire is often told in terms of conquests, battles, and the sweeping expansion of territory across Eurasia. But to truly understand the power and endurance of this empire, we must also examine the cultural, social, and symbolic aspects that underpinned it. Among the most revealing of these aspects is the role of food, how it shaped alliances, reinforced loyalty, and became a medium through which the Khan and his court projected authority and built a lasting legacy. Feeding the Khan and sustaining the empire was not merely a practical concern. It was a lens into the cultural sophistication, political acumen, and social cohesion of a people often underestimated by contemporaries and historians alike. Food, in the Mongol context, was a bridge between survival and diplomacy, between everyday life and the grandeur of imperial ambition. In the vast expanse of the Mongol Empire, stretching from the steppes of Central Asia to the rivers of Eastern Europe and the plains of China, diversity was the defining characteristic of human and natural resources. The Khan and his court were exposed to an array of cultural traditions, culinary practices, and local ingredients, all of which influenced the food served at the imperial table. Conquered regions were often integrated into the empire, not only through tribute and taxation, but also through the sharing of culinary knowledge. Persian grains and spices, Chinese noodles and tea, Central Asian dried fruits and nuts, and European wines and cheeses all found their way into the kitchens of the Khan's court. This fusion of ingredients and techniques was not accidental. It was a deliberate strategy to symbolize the empire's vast reach, its capacity to assimilate and manage diversity, and its ability to nourish its people and leaders with the richness of the known world. The Khan's table became a microcosm of the empire itself, a place where political power, cultural integration, and sustenance converged. Food played a central role in forging alliances and reinforcing loyalty. Diplomatic envoys and visiting dignitaries were treated to elaborate feasts that demonstrated the Khan's wealth, generosity, and organizational prowess. To sit at the Khan's table was to participate in a carefully choreographed performance of political power. The choice of ingredients, the order of serving, the presentation of dishes, all carried symbolic weight. Guests interpreted these gestures, understanding that a generous allocation of food was a mark of favor, while restraint or omission could signify caution or disapproval. In this way, meals became a subtle yet potent tool of diplomacy. The Khan could reward loyalty, negotiate alliances, and communicate intentions without uttering a word, relying instead on the shared understanding of social and cultural codes embedded in the act of eating together. The communal aspects of eating also reinforced internal cohesion within the Mongol court and among the warrior classes. Soldiers, generals, and administrators shared meals that were carefully structured to reflect hierarchy and responsibility. While the Khan enjoyed the finest and most diverse fare, the distribution of food among subordinates was equally deliberate, designed to ensure that each person received sufficient sustenance for endurance while simultaneously reinforcing social order. Sharing meals created bonds of trust and camaraderie. It provided a space where information could be exchanged, orders could be clarified, and morale could be sustained. A well-fed army was not only stronger physically, it was more disciplined, more loyal, and more cohesive. In this sense, food functioned as a critical tool of governance, blending practical necessity with social and political strategy. The cultural dimension of food extended beyond immediate survival and political utility. The Mongols incorporated rituals, traditions, and ceremonial practices into their meals, imbuing them with spiritual and symbolic significance. Certain foods were associated with religious observances, victories in battle, or the marking of seasonal changes. Preparation and consumption of these foods often involved specific rituals, reflecting respect for ancestors, reverence for the natural world, or acknowledgement of divine favor. These practices reinforced a shared cultural identity among the Mongols, linking daily sustenance with the broader values and beliefs of the community. In this way, food was not merely functional, it was a vessel of culture, memory, and meaning. The integration of conquered peoples into the empire also influenced dietary practices, creating a dynamic process of cultural exchange. As Mongol armies advanced, they absorbed the agricultural techniques, recipes, and culinary knowledge of the regions they conquered. Local grains, fruits, vegetables, and spices enriched the Mongol diet, while Mongol methods of preservation, fermentation, and animal husbandry were apt.